fear. The boss is instilling a sense in you that if you stand up for yourself, you'll lose your job, or there's going to be some immediate repercussions. So don't stand up for yourself. Something bad will happen to you.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
You're listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with Adam Keller, and we are joined by Keith Brower Brown, labor and climate organizer with Labor Notes, and Courtney Smith, staff organizer for Labor Notes, to teach you how to do unions better. Thank you, Courtney and Keith. Appreciate y'all taking the time to talk to us today. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Good to be
thanks
here.
for having us.
Absolutely. Really exciting to have you. Tomorrow we're going to be, people will be hearing this significantly later, but tomorrow in the present, as we're recording this, we will be down in Birmingham at the Troublemakers School. And we're going to be going through a couple of the workshops that attendees of the Troublemakers School in Birmingham are going to be going through with y'all and some other Alabama unionists leading the workshops down in Birmingham. And so what we wanted to do, for the people who are not going to be able to go in person, we wanted to try to bring some of the magic of Labor Notes right onto your computer screens. So really excited for the conversation. The first workshop that we wanted to talk through is what they call beating apathy. You know, one of the problems that we have in the labor movement is, and really in a lot of kind of volunteer spaces, if you talk to anybody, somebody who's active in their church, somebody who's active in their fraternity, somebody, any kind of thing like that, you're going to hear a very similar complaint among the people who are leading the organization, and that is that too few people are doing too much of the work. So, we'll start with you, Keith. Can you talk to us about how does it happen that you have one or two or three or four people doing the work of such a big organization as a local union that might represent 100 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 1,000 people? How does it happen that you have a handful of folks doing that work, and what happens when that is the case?
This makes me think right away about a business manager of a big IBW local out in the Central Valley in California who I've talked to over the years, who, not a bad guy, but he has this mindset of like organizing work, bringing new people into the union. That's not members' work, because I have the knowledge of how to do this. I don't want other people to mess it up and make new problems that then I'll have to clean up. So there's this kind of mentality of protecting the union that a lot of union officers get into this mindset sometimes of there's legal risks, there's financial risks, if we rock the boat in the wrong way. So we got to hold tight onto the work of the union. And then there's the problem of that reproduces a sense of membership. That's not our work, So it's not my job to step up and organize my sibling out on the job site who's not in the union yet. So we start the workshops by asking, this workshop, Beating Apathy, starts with asking, raise your hand if the work of your union is equally shared among all the members. Nobody ever raises their hand to that question.
Right.
It's a real problem.
Yeah, and we usually, the way we ask that question is by doing a scale. So, we'll ask, one end on the scale is raise your hand if majority of the members do majority of the work. That's on the 5 scale. And when we're in person, we have people get up and move to different areas of the room. So you have that on one end of the scale, and then on the other end is only a few people doing the majority of the work. And what you see is that most people are on this other end of the spectrum, where it's a few people doing the majority of the work and people are burnt out.
Right. And, there's something of almost like a doom loop when you get into a situation where you have one person doing all of the work, because then that, centralizes all of the knowledge into this one person, and it makes it so that you can't have other people doing the work. And so you can create a situation by, you can have this one task where you as a local union president can say, it would just be easier for me this one time to do this grievance myself. I know how the process works. I know the member, I know the supervisor, I know the problem. I can get a resolution that everybody's going to be happy with in a week. And for somebody else that hasn't done it, it's going to take them forever. They're going to have to learn the whole thing. I'm just going to do it. It's just going to be easier for everybody if I do it. But then if you do it, you're robbing somebody of their ability to learn to do that in the future, and you are robbing yourself of the opportunity to have an engaged membership in the future, and you are forcing yourself to do it in the future, right? And that's like, I would imagine that is kind of really the genesis of a lot of this kind of, a lot of the centralization of knowledge and so many people doing so much of the work. You have people who care and who have their hearts in the right place genuinely, and they know how they think things should be done, how they want things to be done, and so they want to go ahead and do it, and they want to because they think that's going to be the best, but like that's not exactly the best, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it just reinforces itself, right? This bureaucratization of union work creates this cycle where one person is doing it all, and membership looks at the union as a third party kind of service model, where they can go to their union if they have an issue and they'll take care of it. We don't have to think about it. So it just creates this, never ending cycle of one person doing the work or a couple of people doing the work, and then they get burnt out, and then they bring in, new folks who do the work for a few years until they're burnt out, and it just is this, cycle over and over again. So we really ask this question to try to ground people in their own experience of how things are being done, and getting them to think through and come to their own conclusion for why that's not working for them.
And so, the situation of like even people who are in and who are kind of replicating that situation, who are, doing all the grievances themselves and all this, they recognize after they're in it, like, oh, like this is not great, right? Like this is a less than ideal situation for me and my members and my union. And, Labor Notes has this visualization tool to help us think about, to help us visualize this situation and maybe start thinking about how to fix it. Can you explain this tool for us?
We're aiming for the bullseye is what this part of the workshop is called. So the heart of the bullseye is the core of union activists. This isn't necessarily who's elected to the president position or whatever. It's who is constantly talking to people about building the union, trying to strategize, trying to build a stronger union together. A lot of people listening probably in that core or close. The next layer out is activists. So this is the next ring of the bullseye, are activists. So these are people who are consistently showing up, being a part of planning. And the thing that really separates them out from the rest is that they're bringing new people into action. They're talking to their coworkers to get them involved. Next, after that, you got a third layer, the supporters. So these are coworkers who you can count on to show up when there's a big action, sign a petition. They're people you trust to support the union. Next layer out is kind of the biggest one we talk about in this workshop in a lot of ways, disengaged. It's the huge bulk of coworkers who are not plugging in to building the union together yet, who, maybe aren't super anti-union, but they're not doing much to build it. And then beyond that, there's, on the outside of the bullseye, there's hostile, coworkers who are anti-union for whatever reason. We generally say that not worth a ton of time, focus there. We're focusing on bringing in disengaged members to become supporters to become activists who are recruiting more people to be active, and then building your core with new people, making it much bigger so it's not just a few people holding on to this work.
Absolutely, yeah. And one of the things that we try to press on this point is that it's a static thing. It's not, or it's dynamic. It's not static, so it changes, right? So we use the bullseye as a way to conceptualize like where members fall on the rings. And when you're having one-on-one conversations, which we get into later in this workshop, identifying where they fall into the ring and what is that next ask that you can get them to sign on to get them into a supporter ring or the activist ring, sort of. So it's in constant flux, right? And not thinking that everybody needs to be fully engaged at all times, and just identifying what is the ask, what is the thing that we can get someone to say yes to.
And so when you explain the bullseye, and you've got the big, usually a big picture at the front of the room, where do people usually kind of perceive their union, like the bulk of their membership on this graph? You've got the core in the center, you've got the activists, the supporters, the disengaged, and the hostile. Like, what is kind of the percentage breakdown that people have at each of these layers typically that you see in your workshops?
That's a great
Depends
question.
on the union, I would say. I think, like in a teachers union, sometimes there's more people active. Like if people are in a concentrated workplace and they have like some history of organizing together, especially with striking or other sorts of like mass participation kind of direct action, there'll be more people who are supporters, but maybe not really like activists or core. I'd say the most common answers we get, though, is there's a lot of disengaged people in my union, and like a really small core, and maybe twice as many activists and a few more supporters.
Yeah, I think the most important question that we ask with this visualization is like, once you've identified where people fall at on the bullseye, what do you think how the boss sees the union? If this is kind of the layout that we have, or the amount of support that you have, if there's 5 people that's in the core and then the rest are all disengaged, then how does your boss view your power?
Right. And that's, there's a direct relationship basically between where your members are on this graph, like how many people are in the core, how many people are activists, how many people are supporters, and how many people are disengaged, and kind of the power that you have, right? Because if the boss is seeing that, oh, every single grievance, it's Johnny that's filing the grievance, no matter who it is, no matter what department it's in, no matter what the issue is, Johnny is the one writing the grievance, and we don't see any other co-signers on it. If a lot of unions will have like Red Shirt Wednesdays or something, and if you only have like 3 or 4 people wearing the shirt, then you are not the only one that sees that, right? Your boss sees that, and that makes it that much more difficult to kind of have that legitimacy that you need as a union when you say in grievance proceedings or in bargaining or to the media, we represent 1,000 workers at such and such workplace. We are 1,000 workers. Like, are you really?
Yeah.
Does the boss think you are?
Yeah.
You gotta, and so having more of your members closer and closer to the bullseye is going to be the thing that actually gives you that legitimacy and gives you that power. So with that as, the bullseye as the thing, as like the foundation of this training, you ask people to think about how problems are normally solved in their union. So what are some common sets of problems and solutions that you hear when you do this workshop?
It ranges all over the board because bosses throw a lot of problems at us at work, it turns out. But late pay or not getting paid at all for overtime, safety issues on the job, not having the right protective equipment, or like being told to do something at unsafe speed. We get, all sorts of problems, but the answers that we hear consistently and what we kind of expect to hear in this workshop is grievances are a main way we try and fight these problems. We file a grievance, or bargaining, that we're gonna, save this for our next contract bargaining session, and we're gonna make sure we get something then. And we, think that these are obviously important wins of the union movement, to get some kind of grievance process, to get contracts at all. Like, that's a step up from nothing.
Right.
But we can't rest on only that, because those are, in most unions, something that just a few people takes care of. And they can be dragged out indefinitely by the boss in a lot of cases. You can have a grievance languish for 5 years with no real change in your day-to-day life. So we then try and steer towards like what would get results on the shop floor in the near term, in the now.
Well,
Yeah.
just to add to that, I think one of the other things that we try to kind of highlight with just relying on the grievance procedure as a way to solve problems is that it's invisible to most members. So, and I think that's kind of the biggest takeaway that we hope people get from that is, you know, if one person is experiencing a problem and they file a grievance over that issue, but then there's 10 more people who are also experiencing that problem, but they're not even aware that there's someone else that's also experiencing it. Then, you know, it's doing the same bidding as the boss. You know, the boss wants to solve problems on an individual level.
Feeds
because
into divide and conquer.
Yeah. So really, it being invisible to the membership is kind of the biggest issue that comes up with the grievance procedure.
Well, and you know, you mentioned, Keith, that there's, you know, like having a grievance procedure, having a contract, these are all steps up. But even the, you know, even beyond like just recognizing that as a step up, we can understand how there are at least perceived pros to kind of the grievance mill type of thing. You might maybe be able to point to kind of speedy resolution on a one-on-one basis sometimes, or like or you know, maybe that is a, you know, that it's kind of in the shadows is something that maybe the employee who has the grievance wants, right? There may be situations where like, you know, you're embarrassed of the idea that, oh, I'm being put through the discipline procedure. You know, that's embarrassing for some people, and we need to kind of like get people into a mindset where that is less embarrassing, especially if the problem is a collective one and it's not a problem with this individual worker, which so many times it's not. But the idea that I mean, there are people who like sell this as, you know, we just reacted last week on the show to Sean O'Brien on Theo Vaughn's podcast. Y'all probably didn't see this, but he talked about how that he made that as a selling point. He said,
you can't survive as an American worker not represented now that the deck is stacked against you, you know, and you know, the average person, look, you want to go to work, do your job, you know, let us fight for you. Let us take on the grievances at work. You know, don't bring them home. You know, that's the beauty of a union. You know, you don't have to, you have the, you know, you have the backing of a union. You don't have to fight with your employer, make a call and say, hey, you know, to your business agent, you work for me. This is my issue. This is my grievance. I have faith you're going to fix it.
In front of millions of people. It drove me mad. Like, you know, kudos to all the good organizing that the Teamsters are doing under Sean O'Brien, but wow, that was bonkers. And so y'all, you know, you try to point people towards, like, while recognizing the real pros, or, you know, the real and perceived pros of the kind of individual, like, bureaucratic grievance solutions, you try to point people towards, as you were alluding to, Courtney, collective direct action as maybe this can be something that fixes your problems, and maybe this can actually be better. So let's start with a definition. What is collective direct action? Like when you're pointing people in this direction, what do you mean by that? Courtney?
Yeah, I mean, collective action is taking action with a group of your coworkers. So a group of 2-3 people would be a collective action, but that could be anything from signing on to a petition to march on the boss to a full-on strike, right? So anything that involves you and your coworkers that are coming together to solve an issue is considered a collective action.
Keith, why is that effective? Why is it effective for me to get together with my coworkers and do something like that, like signing a petition or marching on the boss or engaging in strike action or work stoppages or slowdowns? Why is that effective? More effective maybe than a grievance?
Real nice softball for us in our wheelhouse here. Yeah, it's effective on 2 levels. One, the boss sees that a huge number of workers are active and coordinated and have decided to do something together. And you're already showing that you have some level of democracy, you have some level of willingness to take risks together to do this march on the boss. And that gets the boss thinking, what else are they willing to do next if I don't do this? I'm not just dealing with Johnny anymore at the grievance table. I'm dealing with Johnny and 18 other people or 80 other people who, if I don't treat them seriously and start dealing with this problem, it could get a lot worse.
Yeah.
Totally. So it works on that level. The boss starts to not feel as powerful by witnessing our collective power. But then we're building our power as coworkers in a different way. We're showing that we're not just relying on a benefactor or a service agency to take care of our problems for us with the boss. We are figuring it out together. And it's our creativity. It's the relationships we already have from working together that can be turned into something that changes our work life. And that feeling can be the kernel of something much better down the line. You know, we have this idea of a campaign mountain where you need to experience some of this collective action on a smaller scale at lower risk before you're ready to climb the mountain and take much bigger risks together. So trying to help people to climb that mountain. And our hope is that, you know, eventually that scales up to where you can really change the power dynamic of your workplace and even imagine beyond your workplace, like how you can fight for the common good better together as coworkers.
Well, now, Courtney, you know, Keith is talking about all this, and it sounds really nice in theory and like in your ideas and in your head and everything. But does this actually, does this ever actually happen in person, in real life? Does it ever happen that way?
All you have to do is read labor notes to see that it happens.
Easy plug.
LaborNotes.org.
Yes. Yeah, no, actually, it was, I was telling Keith earlier and trying to, you know, think of some good stories here. The first time that we did Troublemaker School in Alabama, it was actually my first Troublemaker School as staff with Labor Notes. And so it was my first time doing the beating apathy training in person. And we asked this question: how do you usually solve problems in your workplaase? And because, you know, union density is low in Alabama, there was a lot of new organizing that was workers who were doing new organizing that had come to the school. And so a lot of the answers that I was getting was, oh, we do a march on the boss. And it's funny because in this, you know, when we ask this question, we're expecting people to come back with the, you know, grievance procedures, the way that we usually solve problems. But this group of workers, they were organizing at Amazon, and then there was some USSW Union Southern Service Workers who was doing some good organizing in Atlanta. And so, yeah, they were like, yeah, we do a march on the boss or just do a walkout, you know.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, this happens everywhere. There are plenty of examples of folks who are coming together with their coworkers to take on the boss.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. That's really great to see. And definitely Labor Notes is a good place to read about stories all the time where people are making a difference, you know, by using these sorts of methods. But, you know, it is the case, like I said, there's some pros to the real and perceived pros to the kind of typical grievance procedure of getting things done. And there are also obstacles to a more direct action oriented process of resolving these issues on the job. You know, it's not just like, oh, well, we can do like they said, let's do direct action, so let's just do direct action, and like that's the next step. There are obstacles. What are some of those obstacles that is in the way of workers actually taking this power for themselves and doing more direct action?
Yeah, so I mean, in the first question that we go through, that's kind of highlighting how, you know, maybe members aren't seeing the union take action on the problems that they care about, and that's why they're not getting involved. But then there's this other layer as well of the boss keeping us disorganized, right? And there are 4 ways that we typically talk about with the boss keeping us disorganized, and that's fear, hopelessness, confusion, and division.
What do those mean? And when you say fear, hopelessness, confusion, and division, Keith, what do you mean when you say those things?
Fear. The boss is instilling a sense in you that if you stand up for yourself, you'll lose your job, or that you'll get a much lousier shift, or there's going to be some immediate repercussions. So don't stand up for yourself. Something bad will happen to you. Hopelessness. how could we change things? We don't have the power to change things. I haven't seen that work before. I haven't seen collective action. What's next? We got uncertain confusion. Yeah. Confusion is like the boss spreading like misinformation of like, oh, like there's gonna be like a $2 an hour raise coming in a few months. Like just stick with it for now, or telling different things to different people so that there's this mix of ideas. I mean, there's always a mix of ideas. We never have perfect information as workers, so it's a real one to overcome. And then finally, division. Pitting different groups in the workplace against each other. First shift versus second shift. Different racial or ethnic groups in the workplace saying, oh, you can't trust them, or like we're going to give some good jobs to the white workers, and then some kind of internal competition for a few spots up for grabs. That sort of stuff is really dangerous.
But also tiers is another form of division.
The tier
right?
system.
So people doing the same job and getting paid a different wage.
Totally.
Those sorts of things.
So what are some good, what are some of the most kind of inspiring stories that y'all have heard of people being able to overcome these obstacles that the boss puts in front of us to engage in direct action and win? How are people overcoming in their workplaces fear, hopelessness, confusion, and division?
Man, this one was a hard one for us to try and think of some good stories, because we get we have so many of these workshops and hear so many of these stories, so it's hard to choose just one. Keith, do you have a good example that you can think of?
A couple come to mind. One takes place at a UAW organized auto factory in Toledo, Ohio, the Toledo Jeep plant, where there's actually a Labor Notes article where one of the rank and file leaders of a March on the Boss writes up how there were layoffs essentially of so-called temporary employees who were actually really consistent, like nearly permanent long-term employees. And Stellantis, the employer, this company, still doing terrible layoffs across the company. But instead of just sort of accepting fear that like, oh, if we stand up, then Stellantis is going to lay off more of us, a bunch of the full-time, like permanent employees said like, our siblings who have been laid off, like are with us there every day on the line. They get paid less, but they're, now getting laid off. And this is a division that we don't want to accept. So they organized a March on the Boss. They did a petition that got hundreds of signatures around the plant. This is after the stand-up strike in the UAW last year, where this was one of the first plants out. So, there was a sense that like, oh, after we stood up, now management is really trying to repress us, put more fear and division in here. But a group of the rank and file connected with UAWD, the Reform Caucus in the UAW, worked really hard to spread this idea that we can take collective action ourselves and use our break times to get more petition signatures and spread the word and get a group together to march on the manager. And they won some significant shifts. They didn't get everything right away, but it's helped build a culture there where now they have a really solid group that is still talking about how to use collective action and stand up for themselves.
Yeah. Good story that I was just thinking about with when it comes to division and using race in order to divide workers. A story at Twin Peaks, the restaurant similar to Hooters, had very, if you've ever worked in the service industry, you know that it's clearly divided, front of the house, back of the house. Right. Usually back of the house employees are Spanish speaking and mostly Latino workers in the back, and then in the front, they were doing kind of a scale of who was hotter, and that's how they would choose who would get the better sections. Was who was able to be more dressed up that day, and it usually went to the white women who were in the front. And so at this restaurant, they were back of the house employees was experiencing extreme, discrimination and harassment. And so they had done a March on the Boss, decided collectively that they were done. They didn't want to take this anymore. They did a March on the Boss and asked the owner to fire this manager who was being racist. And he was racist to the front of the house and back of the house. And so owner didn't do anything about it. So they decided to escalate their action, and they ended up staging doing a walkout. And front of the house employees actually wasn't aware that this was going on, but when they seen that the walkout was happening and they heard what the issue was, they was like, oh, I'm actually dealing with the same thing with this same manager. I'm gonna walk out too. And so they did a strike on one of the busiest days of the year. I think it was on Mother's Day. They don't, and they're not even represented by a union. So this, we always say that you don't have to be considered a union. You don't have to have a union to consider yourself a union. It's, a group of workers coming together is enough for you to be a union. That's one of the stories that I love to tell, because it's, a good example of, how you can take an issue like racism, which, is typically seen as like an individual issue or handled on an individual level, and you can see how it spread amongst all the other coworkers. They were also experiencing some of those same issues and decided to act together on it.
Yeah, and being able to overcome division like that, it doesn't even necessarily mean like from having read that story and your retelling of it, it doesn't sound like there was any real kind of animosity among like the workforce along these racial lines, even though that was kind of there was maybe an attempt by management to make that happen. But sometimes we do see some things like that, and overcoming that division, but along these racial lines and whatever other lines might be drawn between genders or immigration status and things like this, it doesn't even necessarily mean that all of the workers involved are like, oh, now they're like totally hip to like everybody deserves everything equally and we're all like on the same kind of page mentally. But you can kind of you can overcome the division by just getting people in some cases to see their common interests. And one of the things that I constantly think about like how cool it was is the packing house workers. I think it was in Cleveland. Labor Notes and Jacobin, I think, have both written about this in the 30s and 40s, and how there were black workers and white workers, and there was a black union and a white union, and one union would scab on the other, like not uncommonly when they would strike. And so after like a few rounds of this, they were like, oh, this is kind of dumb.
Working.
This is bad. That we need to like
do something different here.
Yeah, exactly. And there are interviews from the time of people in the black union saying, oh no, obviously I do not trust these people. These but like I need them, and if they're willing to do this with this one time with me right now, then like I'll take it. And there are similarly interviews of people in the white union still using racial slurs. Like, I don't like N-words, but I need them right now. And they came together, and that union in the 30s and 40s became one of the most through struggle, became one of the most racially progressive unions in Cleveland, was marching for integration before the civil rights movement. I mean, like a really, really inspiring story. And so, like, even if you don't immediately see a like radical kind of recomposition of the ideological makeup of your coworkers, like that's okay, and that's probably not going to happen in your first struggle. It's through struggle that people change. And so that was another story that I always love talking about in these when you get the opportunity. And so the punchline that y'all have in this workshop is that apathy is not real. Yes. Actually, people care about themselves, about their families, about their coworkers, about their work, and about their community, but there are a lot of issues, a lot of obstacles in the way of that, right? And so getting them, like, it's about bringing out those issues. Is one of the big things is actually finding an issue that can clear this hurdle of the existing kind of fear, division, confusion, and I forget the other one, but all the bad things. And so you got to find the issue, and so how do you pick an organizing issue, an issue to build a campaign around that can overcome all of these obstacles that the boss puts in our way, Courtney?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first you have to have one-on-one conversations with your coworkers, right? And so in those conversations, you're kind of building off of the rapport that you have with these people already. So you're starting from whatever connection point you might have, and then you start with, asking questions of like, if there's one thing that you could change at work, what would it be? If you had a magic wand, if this pen was a magic wand and you could change one thing, what would it be? Or asking, if is this your dream job? And, depending on their answer, kind of going off from there, right? And so you ask these series of questions to get them to this place where, you're transforming them from believing that their problems aren't solvable to thinking that their problems have solutions and that they can come together and be a part of bringing those solutions if they come together with their coworkers, right? So we start with this, you have to talk to your coworkers. You have to figure out what is it that they care most about. And so once you, have a series of conversations with folks and you do it in kind of a systematic way, then from there you can sort of start to identify what the issue is that the most people care about. And a way to identify what makes a good organizing issue is that it's widely felt, it's deeply felt, it's winnable, and it can build the union and build leaders.
And you have to, you're able to find those issues by like having these conversations with your coworkers, and when if a certain issue kind of pops up a lot, and it meets these other criteria about being winnable and something that can build the union, then like that is something that you can build a campaign around. If you're constantly having conversations and somebody's always like, this same problem A, keeps appearing in your conversations, and that can be an issue to build a campaign around. And you mentioned that having these conversations is so important, and having one-on-one conversations is really important, and is kind of the best way to do this if you can make that happen. And you've got a whole big section in this workshop, and actually we're kind of running basically with time with the workshop right now. But the biggest portion is about how to structure an organizing conversation, and we're not going to have time to talk to do the whole big thing, because there's a science and an art to having an organizing conversation. But give us what are the top lines of having an organizing conversation with my coworkers, Keith? What are some of the top lines to remember?
Active listening. You gotta ask way more questions than you're talking at somebody. As organizers, we often have like a grand plan in mind of like where we want somebody to fill into our plan. For this to work, for you to identify an issue that this person will be willing to take action on, you gotta ask a lot of questions and show that you care, and like maybe you've heard of other people dealing with those, respond, help them feel not alone in that. We encourage people after sort of those identifying questions to do some like agitating, like, why do you think it is this way? Who's responsible for this? Like polarize against the boss and be like, who has the power to change this? So instead of feeling hopeless or like this is just built into the workplace, get a conversation going about like, who should be changing this and is not. And then from there, you can get into an ask where you're like, okay, we want to change this. We know who can do it. Are you down to meet with me after work with like 5 other people who I know also really care about this, and we'll come up with a plan together for something to do about it.
Yeah, I think, we really struggled over how to structure the organizing conversation in this training, because it feels sort of robotic the way that people can be trained on how to be on how to have an organizing conversation. Is like there's these steps that you have to go through, right? And it can feel, you can feel that, I think, as the recipient of being organized on. You can feel that energy when somebody's like, at the end they're going to ask you to do something and you might not want to do it. So we really shifted like having that organizing conversation to figuring out what are the questions that you can ask that can really get them to come to their own conclusion about the problem, and what to do about the problem, instead of you just like talking at them and giving them the solution to their problem. I think that's a lot of the way that unions typically organize is they say, we have a plan and we're going to enact this plan and we just need you to sign on to the
Come
plan.
fill in the blank.
Right.
in my plan.
Yeah. But if they feel like, from start to finish, they've been a part of this kind of process, they got to identify the issue. They got to come to a meeting with 5 other people and talk through what's a solution that we can do about this. And then they get to figure out what the plan is around it. It's a much more, it's a stronger way to get people involved for the long haul.
There you go, folks. We beat apathy. It's done, defeated, vanquished, and so there you go. Thanks for talking to us about this, Courtney and Keith. You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.